say, but we don't. But we do have a say over how much of it we consume. Okay, that is just generally a reflection of how efficiently a company chooses to operate in terms of its electricity efficiency. In South Africa, the very important metric to understand, or grid emission factor, is 1.03 tons of CO2 are emitted for every megawatt hour of electricity that is consumed. That is one of the highest grid emission factors in the world, and is largely as a result of the dirty coal-fired power that we are reliant upon for our energy resource, as well as the fact that our infrastructure, our emission lines and infrastructure is not in a very good shape, so it becomes less and less efficient every year. Scope 3 emissions is something we need to understand. Now, the Greenhouse Gas Protocol says that we need to get an idea of the impact of us doing business with other service providers and with our customers. And that is really the reason why we measure our Scope 3 emissions. We can't take 100% responsibility for it because we don't neither own nor control those resources, but we do have a level of influence that we can exert upon the people that we do business with, the staff in our organizations, as well as our customers. And some good examples of Scope 3 emissions are really business travel by aeroplane, by car rental, waste, and getting it to the landfill and what happens when it's there, getting water to our site and the energy required for that, the procurement of products and services and getting it from our supplier's gate to our facility, as well as getting our products from our facility to our customers. So these are all examples of situations where we aren't actually in control of everything, but we rely upon these processes in order to do business. Also taking into consideration the employees and getting those employees to work and back every year is very, very important, and we need to calculate that so that we can change and influence behavior. Data collation. Okay, so we need to understand exactly what needs to be collected within the boundaries that we have chosen. And really the big thing we need to understand about this is we ideally need data in standard units. Standard units being kilowatt hours, liters of diesel, liters of petrol, cubic meters of gas, whatever it is that we need to understand it in standard units. Okay? We need to identify what data needs to be collected, where the data will be found, and who will be responsible for its collection. This all needs to be defined in the planning process. Let's be clear on this. The data collation process, especially in the first carbon footprint assessment, is a very painful and can be a very time-consuming exercise. And it's very important that we understand during the planning process what those challenges are so we don't get stuck on these challenges, because the biggest challenge is that in the previous year, which is the carbon footprint that we're going to be assessing the first time, processes and systems were in place already and they weren't necessarily geared towards carbon accounting and reporting. So we might be in a situation where there is no information for that particular activity, or that we have information but it's in rands and cents and not in standard units that we require it in. So we need to make then certain decisions about assumptions and extrapolations and things like that. But this needs to be handled in the planning process, and we get a fair idea of what the challenges are going to be during that process. Challenges in data in the actual carbon footprinting process. One is lack of activity data, as I mentioned just now. The data just isn't there, and so we can do nothing about it really, except just try and make sure that it's there the next time. Activity data being in the incorrect format, this is a big problem, and it's often a big problem. Companies just want to know how much their electricity costs and not that concerned about the kilowatt hours, for example. We need kilowatt hours. So we sensitize the team during the planning process, and for example, company-owned vehicles, we may have rands spent on petrol. We need liters of petrol rather. We don't have that. We try and see if we have the type of vehicle and the distance traveled, because that's slightly better than just having the rand value. But in the absence of both of those, we rely on the rand value, and we will make certain assumptions based on that. Obviously not as accurate as we would want, but better than nothing. The resolution, we either persist and try and make it happen, or we try and work it out, or we just accept the status quo and we make certain assumptions. And we just very clearly communicate those assumptions in the report. The result is that your first year assessment is actually not accurate. It's more a learning process. We may, if we're lucky, be 70% accurate in the first year, particularly when it comes to Scope 3 emissions. So the best thing we can do from this whole exercise, your first carbon footprint, is really a very important learning process, and a process that allows us to implement systems and processes beyond the first carbon footprint so that we can improve those systems so that in the consecutive carbon footprint we're able to be a hell of a lot more accurate and more complete than we were in the first one. So the carbon footprint process, establish an emissions boundary, and we spoke about that. Very important that at the end of that process, we put it into a document, everyone signs off that document, everyone's clear about what they need to do, how they need to do it, and what they need to look at. Then we collect the activity data, we quantify the amounts. We do this, we will distribute questionnaires and surveys to the relevant people from the green team and make sure that they all know exactly what those need to be populated with. Step 3 is we calculate the greenhouse gas inventory by applying the relevant and most appropriate emission factors to the data that we have collected. The fourth thing is obviously writing the report. The concept of intensity reporting, let's be clear on this as well. Intensity reporting is very important because this is the only measure that we can really use to benchmark ourselves against ourselves on an annual basis and to compare ourselves to other companies so that we are comparing like on like. It is no use to us to know that a company's carbon footprint is 10,000 tons of CO2 per year, because next year it might be 20,000 tons of CO2, but it might not necessarily mean that the company is performing worse than it did in the previous year. It may just be a measure of the company's expansion during the period. So what we need to do is we need to agree upfront on the metrics we're going to use to be able to measure our environmental performance going forward on an ongoing basis. And the most generic of these measures is really per employee, per square meter, or per million rand of turnover. For certain other companies, like logistics companies, it's per kilometer travel, per kilogram of goods delivered. Depending on what kind of business you're in, you might find something that is more appropriate and more meaningful. So we need to understand that so that on an annual basis, we can compare ourselves in a relevant and meaningful way, take into consideration the expansion and the contraction of our business, which often happens. The carbon footprint report. Okay, this is obviously something that is quite subjective, but something that works very, very well for us. Starts off, I mean, this is generally from our perspective, it can be about a 40 to 60 page report. The executive summary is a 2 to 3 page summary with an overview of the inventory. We talk about the introduction and overview, which takes into consideration the background, objectives, methodology applied, as well as the boundaries that are applicable to this particular assessment. Then we look at the greenhouse gas inventory and we drill down into each of the different scopes. We have the summary and the executive summary, but then in the actual inventory we break it down and we see exactly what each of those scopes comprise. We talk about intensity reporting, and if it is a consecutive carbon footprint, then we will provide the comparison with previous periods. We also provide benchmarking with the data that is publicly available in similar sectors, companies in similar sector. And then we also make sure, and very important, that the recommendations regarding processes and systems are clear in the report so that the gaps that are found in the data collation process can be filled during the next period. We also provide very clear communication on the assumptions and the limitations that were made, because often what happens is that there is a changeover or a turnover of staff, and if someone comes and has to pick up, they are unable to really make head or tail of what was done in the previous year. Recommendations, emissions reduction recommendations, both in terms of technology and behavior, are included in this part of the report, and then a concise conclusion in bullet point about what needs to be done. Carbon footprint is merely the start of a journey. Let's be clear on this. Okay, it is not the be-all and end-all. Companies do it and often think, wow, we've done this, now what? It's a start of a process. And as you can see, the last 3 tiles in that graphic are very clear. Develop emissions reduction action plan is really the next part of the process. Okay, in order to do that, we need to drill down into the high impact areas of the carbon footprint. For example, a retail business will be very heavy on electricity consumption. Okay, an industrial process might be very heavy on diesel. So what we do there is we will take those different sections and we will apply what we call drill down audits. Okay, so if energy is a big contributor, we will do what we call a investment grade energy efficiency audit. Okay, and what that is different to a carbon footprint is we only focus on electricity, and we also do a complete measurement of current consumption, so we understand what consumes energy, what is required in order to reduce that electricity consumption, how much is required to be invested, what is the forecast savings, and what the resultant return on investment and payback periods will be. We can do that for energy, electricity, water, waste, depending on what is the big stress point in those businesses. So once we have those reports, then we are able to make informed decisions, or management can make informed decisions on how much they need to invest, in which period, and what the opportunity costs of those investments will actually be. For most companies, however, that are reliant on the ESCOM grid-connected electricity, for example, and are reliant on distribution through using internal combustion engines in their trucks, they will not be able to reduce their carbon footprint down to zero. It may be an aspiration, but practically almost impossible. So there will be a portion of the carbon footprint that can't actually be reduced. And for many companies, the big trend today is to be carbon neutral. Avis is carbon neutral. Nedbank is carbon neutral. These are companies that have said, right, we'll reduce as much as we can, but we are actually going to get involved in this whole concept of carbon trading, where we buy the emission reductions or carbon credits, as they call them, from a third-party program that can actually be used to offset the remainder of the carbon footprint that we weren't able to reduce. And that's a really big opportunity today in South Africa, because it's very much aligned with the company's corporate social investment strategy. So you invest in a third-party project where there's fuel-efficient cook stoves in an underserved community, and not only are you getting the carbon benefit of the emissions reductions, but you're also able to enhance socially enhance an underserved community. Very, very important in terms of getting traction with this whole concept is to ensure that everything we do, all the knowledge that is gained, all the learnings that come out of this process is integrated into the psyche or the brand of the company. And this is done through ongoing measurement and monitoring, as well as capacity building, so we can upskill people within the organization to be able to do the stuff that we do, building awareness through educational programs, integrating software so that the collation and accounting and reporting structures is much easier to do, and really just ensuring that all stakeholders within the organization are aware that this is part of the company's strategy and are actively engaged day to day in the rolling out of the strategy. Just so we're also clear on what a product carbon footprint is, we have been speaking only about the carbon footprint of a company's activities. The carbon footprint of a product is a different thing entirely. Well, not entirely. It does incorporate the carbon footprint of the company's activities, but we do expand the boundaries or the scope of the assessment to include much more of the upstream and downstream activities. Many of you may have heard of the cradle-to-grave concept, which includes the full life cycle of a product, and that includes the extraction of raw materials, the processing of those raw materials, the transport and logistics and getting them to where they need to be, the sale of those products, the consumption and the disposal of the packaging of those products into landfill. That is what we call a full life cycle. And when we do a product carbon footprint, we ensure that we are completely across every single part of that value chain, so that we can come with one number at the end that says this product results in X amount of CO2 being emitted into the atmosphere. Why are companies very interested in doing product carbon footprinting? One, there's this trend towards product labeling, okay, where we can say that this liter of milk basically has embedded carbon value of X amount of CO2 in its production. Okay. The other thing that's becoming important among our clients is they are switching to using recycled products rather than virgin resources for the production of their products, and they want to be able to prove by comparing that their new process is much more efficient and is much less harmful to the environment. So they embark on this journey to do that comparison by comparing the two processes. They can see exactly what the reduced impact is. Raw material, energy efficiency. When you do a product carbon footprint and you do a full product map of the value chain, it gives you great visibility into all the processes upstream and downstream, and allows you to make decisions and switch suppliers and do what you need to do in order to get maximum efficiency, which has a positive impact on the bottom line. Consumer demand. Consumers are becoming more savvy and they want to know more information so that they can make more informed purchase decisions. Supply chain efficiency. Greening the supply chain is becoming a big topic too in carbon reporting, and this gives us visibility into who's doing what and which companies we should be doing business with. As you can see, a product carbon footprint, this is an example of a product map, and we can see from raw materials right through to disposal, it's a lot more complex than just doing a carbon footprint of a company's activities. just so you understand, if we were a manufacturer, you would only be looking at the narrow band in the manufacturing sector